September 15th, 1944, Aachen, Germany. The metal hatch felt ice-cold beneath Corporal Michael Brennan's gloved hands as he stood exposed in the commander's position, scanning the shattered cityscape through the autumn fog. His orders that morning had been explicit, almost merciful. "No forward assault today, Brennan. You and your boys have done enough. Take the rear guard position. Stay alive." But crouched in that turret 5 miles from the Belgian border with the Wehrmacht's steel teeth grinding behind every ruined building, Brennan understood a truth that nearly 4 months of continuous combat had seared into his soul. In this war, there were no safe positions, only degrees of danger. The Sherman tank beneath him, christened Iron Promise in fading white letters across its scarred hull, represented the 3rd time those words had marked American armor under his command. The first 2 tanks bearing that name had been obliterated. This one, in less than 3 hours, would become the stage for a confrontation that would cement the most devastating anti-tank killing record in United States military history. The morning air carried the acrid mixture of cordite residue and burning diesel from yesterday's street fighting. Brennan could hear the low rumble of supporting Shermans repositioning through the rubble-choked avenues, the metallic grind of tracks crushing brick and mortar, the terse voices of other tank commanders verifying coordinates over crackling radio frequencies. Somewhere ahead, concealed within the skeletal remains of apartment blocks and factory walls, German defenders waited with their 88mm cannons and panzerschreck rockets, weapons that had already claimed dozens of American crews in this sector alone. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Brennan had confronted these instruments of destruction countless times over the preceding months. He had learned to respect their lethal efficiency, to fear their penetrating power, but never to allow that fear to paralyze his tactical judgment. His entire combat philosophy rested upon a single immutable principle: strike with overwhelming speed, strike with absolute precision, close the killing distance before superior German firepower could establish dominance. That aggression had sustained him through 23 major engagements, through the destruction of 2 previous tanks, through innumerable moments where enemy projectiles had whistled past within inches or ricocheted off armor plating without achieving fatal penetration. But on this grey September morning, with home leave and desperately needed rest merely days away, Brennan's extraordinary fortune was approaching its inevitable termination point. June 9th, 1941. Fort Benning, Georgia. The enlistment documentation bore the signature of a 20-year-old farm laborer from Timber Ridge, Kentucky, who had abandoned his agricultural economic studies at Eastern Kentucky State Teachers College to answer his nation's summons. Michael Patrick Brennan stood 6 feet 1 inch tall, a lean frame constructed through years of working the unforgiving Appalachian soil, his hands calloused from axe handles and plow traces before they would master the mechanical controls of a 33-ton armored fighting vehicle. He had entered the world on March 12, 1921, the eldest of 4 siblings in the tight-knit farming community of Timber Ridge, though his formative years unfolded on a hard-scrabble homestead near the neighboring settlement of Pine Hollow. Both communities occupied the rugged hill country of eastern Kentucky, where summer temperatures climbed past 95 degrees and dependable rainfall remained perpetually uncertain. Existence on an Appalachian farm during the 1920s demanded relentless physical exertion from dawn until dusk, tending livestock, repairing deteriorating fences, maintaining equipment with whatever salvaged materials could be improvised or bartered. Electrical service remained an impossible luxury for most rural households. Running water arrived through hand-pumped wells requiring daily labor. Entertainment consisted of battery-powered radio broadcasts when funds permitted and weekly community gatherings at the Methodist Church every Sunday. Michael and his younger brother Thomas maintained an inseparable bond despite their contrasting temperaments. Thomas would eventually enlist in the Marine Corps, serving throughout the Pacific Campaign on amphibious assault vessels. Their sisters, Catherine and Elizabeth, completed the Brennan household. Their father, Patrick Henry Brennan, and mother, Margaret Rose O'Connor Brennan, instilled in their children the fundamental values of persistent effort, self-discipline, and patriotic service. Young Michael, who carried the nickname Mick among family and childhood companions, demonstrated remarkable physical coordination and intellectual capacity from his earliest years. He attended Timber Ridge Consolidated School, graduating in 1938, where he distinguished himself in basketball as a starting forward whose agility and competitive intensity made him exceptional on the court. But Brennan's capabilities extended far beyond athletics. He possessed a penetrating analytical mind and fierce determination to achieve academic excellence. After completing his secondary education at Timber Ridge in 1938, Brennan enrolled at Eastern Kentucky State Teachers College in Richmond, an institution renowned for its demanding academic standards and commitment to developing rural educators. Brennan flourished in this intellectually rigorous environment, applying the same intensity he brought to basketball and farm labor to his coursework in agricultural economics. He graduated with superior academic distinction in 1940, an achievement that opened pathways toward a promising career in agricultural development or rural education. Brennan then accepted a graduate assistantship at the University of Kentucky in Lexington, pursuing advanced studies in agricultural economics and rural development policy. His aptitude for statistical analysis and economic systems theory suggested a distinguished career in government agricultural service or university research, but world events beyond Brennan's influence would interrupt these aspirations. During his university years, Brennan also pursued amateur boxing, competing in the 165-pound weight division. The sport aligned perfectly with his natural temperament. Boxing demanded controlled aggression, instantaneous reflexes, strategic calculation, and the psychological fortitude to absorb punishment while maintaining offensive pressure. Brennan proved exceptionally skilled in the ring, compiling a remarkable amateur record of 38 victories against only 2 defeats. His aggressive counter-punching style and devastating body shots earned him the Kentucky Intercollegiate Championship in Louisville, Kentucky. The National Amateur Boxing Federation invited him to compete in regional elimination tournaments, an opportunity that could have launched a professional fighting career. Brennan declined the invitation. He maintained other priorities. Graduate studies in agricultural economics called to him more powerfully than the precarious existence of a professional fighter. But the discipline, controlled aggression, and competitive mentality that boxing cultivated would serve him extraordinarily well in a vastly different kind of combat. By 1941, the world had descended into global warfare. Germany had subjugated most of continental Europe. Britain stood isolated against the Nazi military apparatus. Japan was expanding its imperial conquest throughout Asia and the Pacific. The United States officially maintained neutrality, but every informed observer understood that American entry into the conflict represented merely a question of timing, not possibility. Young men throughout America confronted a fundamental choice: wait for conscription or enlist voluntarily and exercise some influence over their branch assignment and military specialization. Brennan made his decision with characteristic decisiveness. On June 9, 1941, exactly 6 months before the Pearl Harbor attack would thrust America into war, Michael Patrick Brennan walked into the recruitment station at Fort Benning in Columbus, Georgia, and enlisted in the United States Army. He was 20 years old, stood 6 feet 1 inch tall, weighed approximately 170 pounds, and possessed the physical conditioning of a competitive athlete combined with the intellectual discipline of a scholar. The Army would transform him into something unprecedented, a tank commander who would establish the highest verified enemy armor destruction rate in American military history. The newly activated 4th Armored Division at Pine Camp, New York, became Brennan's introduction to mechanized warfare doctrine. The division had been formally established on April 15, 1941, merely 2 months before Brennan's enlistment, as part of America's massive military expansion in anticipation of inevitable war. The 4th Armored Division would eventually earn the nickname Breakthrough for its role in penetrating German defensive lines throughout France and into the Third Reich itself, always spearheading the advance, always driving deeper into enemy-controlled territory than any other American formation. Brennan was assigned to Company B, 2nd Battalion, 37th Armored Regiment, where he would serve as a tank commander in the 2nd Platoon. This assignment would define every subsequent aspect of his existence. The 4th Armored Division represented America's institutional commitment to mechanized warfare, a relatively revolutionary concept that had proven devastatingly effective when employed by German panzer formations during their conquest of Poland, France, and the initial Soviet campaigns. The division's organizational structure reflected tactical lessons derived from studying German armored operations with meticulous attention. It integrated tank battalions with mechanized infantry, mobile artillery, combat engineers, and support elements, all trained to function together as a synchronized fighting force capable of sustained offensive operations. The division's primary combat power derived from its tank battalions, initially equipped with the M3 Lee medium tank, a transitional design mounting a 75mm gun in a hull sponson and a 37mm gun in a rotating turret. The M3 Lee was functionally obsolete before entering production, but American tank manufacturing in 1941 could not yet deliver superior designs in adequate quantities. The M4 Sherman, which would become the standard American medium tank for the war's duration, was just entering initial production when Brennan joined the Army. Training at Pine Camp proved intensely demanding and physically exhausting. Brennan and his fellow armor crewmen learned to operate, maintain, and fight from tracked armored vehicles under every conceivable environmental condition and tactical scenario. They practiced gunnery procedures until they could identify targets and engage them within seconds of visual acquisition. They mastered radio communication protocols for coordinating actions with other tanks, infantry elements, and artillery support batteries. They studied German tactical doctrine and equipment specifications in exhaustive detail, learning the capabilities and vulnerabilities of the panzer formations they would eventually confront in combat. They conducted endless field training exercises, simulating offensive operations, defensive positions, and pursuit missions designed to replicate European battlefield conditions. The New York countryside became their tactical laboratory, its forests and rolling terrain providing environmental conditions that approximated the European theaters where they would eventually fight. Brennan's natural aggression, intuitive tactical judgment, and fierce competitive drive marked him immediately as exceptional among his peer group. Officers noted his intensity during training exercises, his absolute refusal to accept second-place performance in any competitive evolution. During gunnery qualification exercises, Brennan's tank consistently achieved the highest scores in the entire battalion. During tactical field problems, Brennan demonstrated an intuitive comprehension of terrain analysis and enemy position identification that exceeded what could be taught through classroom instruction alone. He studied every technical aspect of armored warfare with obsessive attention: how tanks maneuvered across varied terrain, how they fought effectively in different tactical situations, where their mechanical and tactical vulnerabilities existed. He learned to interpret terrain features like a topographical expert, identifying positions that offered advantages in fields of fire, concealment opportunities, and routes for advance or tactical withdrawal. Most critically, Brennan demonstrated natural leadership ability that inspired confidence and loyalty. The soldiers under his command respected his judgment, trusted his tactical decisions implicitly, would follow him into any dangerous situation without hesitation. That trust would be earned and validated repeatedly through dozens of combat engagements where Brennan's decisions meant the difference between survival and catastrophic loss. Brennan demanded absolute excellence from himself and every member of his crew, driving them through exhaustive gunnery drills, driving practice sessions, and tactical coordination exercises that continued long after other crews had secured their equipment and retired for evening mess. He was never arbitrary or cruel in his demands for superior performance. He simply understood with absolute clarity that in actual combat, the difference between a superbly trained crew and a merely adequate one represented the difference between survival and death. Every second saved in target acquisition translated directly into firing first, which usually determined the engagement's outcome. Every round that achieved target impact meant one fewer enemy tank returning fire. Every correct radio transmission meant improved coordination and supporting fires from adjacent units. Brennan drilled these fundamental principles into his crew until their actions became automatic responses requiring no conscious thought. Load, aim, fire. Reload became a synchronized rhythm, as natural as breathing. Identify target, assess range, adjust fire became instinctive response patterns, executed without deliberation. The crew would require every element of that intensive training when they finally entered combat operations. When the opportunity arose to receive a commission as a second lieutenant, Brennan refused without hesitation. Commissioned officers commanded from battalion or company headquarters positions, coordinating multiple tank platoons and supporting elements from command posts located behind the forward combat zone. Brennan wanted to fight from inside a tank turret, to lead from the most forward positions where he could personally observe the enemy and make instantaneous tactical decisions based on direct observation rather than second-hand radio reports. He preferred to remain physically close to his crew, close to the actual fighting where his tactical judgment would have immediate impact. That decision would prove absolutely defining. Staff sergeants did not typically command tank platoons in combat operations, but Brennan's exceptional demonstrated abilities and aggressive leadership style would result in him leading multiple tanks in attack after attack, trusted by his superior officers to accomplish missions that would normally fall to commissioned officers holding ranks of first lieutenant or captain. Training operations continued throughout 1942 and into 1943, expanding beyond Pine Camp to additional training locations across the United States. The 4th Armored Division deployed to the Desert Training Center in California's Mojave Desert, where the vast open spaces and harsh environmental conditions provided excellent preparation for potential combat operations in North Africa or other arid theaters. The desert maneuvers tested both soldiers and equipment under extreme heat, choking dust storms, and terrain that offered virtually no natural concealment. Tank commanders learned navigation by dead reckoning across featureless expanses where traditional landmarks did not exist. Maintenance crews learned to keep their vehicles operational under conditions that caused metal components to expand beyond tolerances, rubber seals to deteriorate, and mechanical systems to overheat beyond normal operational parameters. The lessons absorbed in the California desert would prove valuable, though the 4th Armored Division would ultimately fight in European forests and cities rather than African deserts. After desert training concluded, the division relocated to Camp Bowie, Texas, for final preparation before overseas deployment. The rolling hills and mixed terrain of central Texas more closely resembled European topography than either New York forests or California deserts. Here, the division practiced the combined arms tactics that would prove decisive throughout France and Germany, tanks advancing with infantry support, protected by preparatory and supporting artillery fires, with combat engineers prepared to breach obstacles and clear minefields, all elements coordinating through disciplined radio communications and rehearsed tactical procedures. Radio discipline improved dramatically. Maintenance procedures were refined and standardized. Organizational weaknesses and tactical deficiencies were systematically identified and corrected through after-action reviews following each training evolution. By late 1943, the 4th Armored Division had achieved readiness for combat operations as complete as peacetime training could produce. During these years of intensive preparation, Brennan experienced significant developments in his personal life. He married Sarah Catherine Mitchell during emergency leave in December 1942, a brief interlude of normalcy and profound happiness before his deployment to the European War that would define his generation's historical legacy. Sarah would maintain faithful correspondence throughout the war, writing letters that sustained Brennan through the darkest periods of combat, stress, and psychological exhaustion, eventually raising a family that would include 6 children, 3 sons and 3 daughters. The marriage would endure until Brennan's death, nearly 48 years later, a testament to the resilient bond they forged during those brief moments together before Brennan departed for England and the battlefields beyond. In October 1943, Brennan and the 37th Armored Regiment boarded military transport ships in New York Harbor, crossing the Atlantic Ocean to staging areas in England. The ocean crossing required approximately 2 weeks, with thousands of soldiers packed into converted passenger liners and cargo vessels, sleeping in cramped berthing spaces, enduring rough seas, and the constant psychological threat of German U-boat wolf packs prowling the convoy routes. The convoy executed continuous zigzag patterns across the Atlantic to complicate submarine attack solutions, protected by destroyer escorts that maintained constant sonar surveillance and dropped depth charges whenever underwater contacts suggested possible enemy submarines. Brennan and his fellow tankers arrived safely in Southampton in late October 1943. The 4th Armoured Division would spend 8 months in England from October 1943 through June 1944, continuing training operations and preparing for the cross-channel invasion that everyone understood was approaching. The division staged near Bristol and throughout Somerset, conducting tactical exercises across the English countryside, learning to coordinate operations with British units, and receiving final equipment and personnel replacements that would bring the division to full authorized strength. The extended waiting period proved psychologically difficult. Everyone understood that invasion and subsequent combat were inevitable, but no one possessed knowledge of the exact timing or landing locations. Rumors circulated constantly throughout the division. Security, protocols were absolute. Training continued relentlessly. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. During this English staging period, Brennan experienced his first and only defeat in combat sports competition. Joe Louis, the heavyweight boxing champion universally known as the Brown Bomber, toured England in May 1944, conducting exhibition matches for military personnel awaiting the invasion. Louis was arguably the greatest heavyweight champion in boxing history, a cultural icon whose victories in the ring had transcended sport to become symbols of American strength and democratic values. His second victory over German boxer Max Schmeling in 1938 had assumed enormous political significance as a symbolic rejection of Nazi racial ideology and claims of Aryan superiority. Now Louis utilized his celebrity status to boost troop morale, sparring with servicemen in friendly exhibition bouts designed to entertain rather than injure. Few soldiers possessed sufficient confidence to step into the ring with the reigning heavyweight champion of the world, but Brennan, characteristically confident and perpetually competitive, volunteered without hesitation for an exhibition match. The bout was scheduled for May 7, 1944, at a military facility near Bristol. The event was intended as a friendly exhibition, light controlled sparring designed to entertain assembled troops awaiting their deployment orders. Brennan approached it differently. His competitive instincts and boxer's training completely overrode the exhibition format. He attacked Louis aggressively from the opening bell, landing several solid combinations that genuinely surprised the champion and drew enthusiastic reactions from the watching soldiers. Louis responded by placing his arm around Brennan's shoulders and speaking quietly enough that ringside spectators could not hear. "Son, I'm about to teach you an important lesson about levels." The educational demonstration followed swiftly and comprehensively. Louis proceeded to systematically dismantle Brennan's offense, using his vastly superior hand speed, devastating power, and refined technical skills to dominate the young sergeant without actually injuring him. Louis could have ended the exhibition with a knockout punch at any moment during the 3-round bout, but instead chose to demonstrate the vast chasm separating amateur boxing from professional championship-level competition. Brennan would later acknowledge with characteristic humor that Joe Louis turned me inside out and upside down during that exhibition match. But Brennan departed that ring with something more valuable than victory. He absorbed a critical lesson that even overwhelming physical advantages and superior technical skills could be negated through proper tactical approach, precise timing, and seizing the exactly overwhelming's correct moment to strike. He learned that raw aggression alone proved insufficient without tactical intelligence guiding its application. Skill, timing, precision, and cerebral calculation mattered equally. Those lessons would serve him extraordinarily well in the armoured battles awaiting him across the English Channel in occupied France, June 20th, 1944, Utah, Beach, Normandy, France. The 4th Armoured Division came ashore 14 days after the initial D-Day assault, wading through cold surf under overcast skies that threatened renewed storms. The beach still bore vivid evidence of the invasion's ferocity. Shattered landing craft rested half-submerged in tidal zones, destroyed German fortifications crowned the bluffs above, and vast supply dumps containing ammunition, fuel, rations, and replacement equipment covered every available metre of sand and grass. Military police directed an endless stream of traffic, attempting to impose order as thousands of vehicles moved inland toward designated assembly areas. The smell of Atlantic saltwater mixed with diesel exhaust, wet earth, and the persistent odour of high explosives that permeated everything. Brennan's first Sherman, an M4 Aoun mounting a 75mm main gun, came ashore without mechanical incident. The waterproofing systems held against the surf, the engine started reliably, and the tank ground up the beach under its own power, leaving deep track impressions in the sand. Over the following several days, the division assembled in designated staging areas, removed waterproofing materials, test-fired all weapon systems, performed preventive maintenance on every vehicle, and prepared psychologically for the combat that awaited them beyond the beachhead perimeter. Brennan's crew had trained together for months, developing the kind of synchronized precision that represented the difference between survival and catastrophic loss in armored combat. Now they would discover whether months of intensive training proved sufficient for the brutal reality of mechanized warfare against a determined and experienced enemy. Brennan personally selected each member of his crew, choosing soldiers whose technical skills and psychological temperament complemented each other perfectly, and matched his own aggressively offensive approach to tank combat. Corporal James Jimmy Morrison, called Kid despite being 23 years old because of his youthful appearance and perpetual optimism, served as driver. Morrison stood only 5 feet 6 inches tall, compact and wiry, but he possessed exceptional skill at maneuvering the Sherman through impossible spaces and terrain. Brennan often joked that Jimmy could thread the 33-ton Sherman through a shopping district during rush-hour traffic, an exaggeration that contained essential truth. Morrison could navigate the massive tank through narrow village streets, reverse at high speed while under direct fire, and position the cars, Sherman, for optimal firing angles with precision that exceeded most drivers in the regiment. Morrison drove with his hatch open whenever tactical conditions permitted, having once been temporarily trapped inside a tank when a hatch mechanism jammed during a training accident. That terrifying experience left him with lasting anxiety about being trapped inside a burning vehicle, a fear that every tanker shared but Morrison felt with particular intensity. The open hatch provided better visibility and a faster escape route if the tank was penetrated, though it also exposed him to shell fragments and small arms fire. Private First Class David Preacher Sullivan, just 18 years old and called Preacher for his habit of reading scripture aloud during quiet moments, served as assistant driver and bow gunner, operating the .30 caliber Browning M 1919 machine gun mounted in the front hull. Sullivan hailed from rural Alabama, looked impossibly young with smooth features and a slight frame that made him appear younger than his actual age, but appearances deceived completely. Sullivan was absolutely vicious with that bow-mounted machine gun, cutting down enemy infantry with measured, precise fire that conserved ammunition while maximizing casualties. His position in the right front hull gave him excellent fields of fire forward and to the right flank, covering the approach routes that German infantry would use attempting to close within Panzerfaust range or to attack the tank with magnetic anti-tank mines. Sullivan was also responsible for assisting with ammunition handling during intense combat engagements, passing rounds from storage racks to the loader when speed became absolutely critical. Sergeant First Class Robert Dutch van der Berg, 28 years old and nicknamed Dutch for his Pennsylvania German heritage, manned the main gun. Van der Berg came from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, older than the rest of the crew, and possessed a calm, methodical temperament that provided perfect counterbalance to Brennan's intensity. Dutch claimed he intended to see all of France through his gun sight, his face perpetually marked by the circular impression of his gunner's optics. He maintained his eye pressed to the telescopic sight constantly, ready to engage targets at any instant. The gunner's position demanded absolute concentration and exceptional hand-eye coordination. The gunner had to identify targets rapidly through limited optics, judge range accurately without sophisticated range-finding equipment, select the correct ammunition type for each target, aim precisely while the tank moved across uneven terrain, and fire at exactly the optimal moment when aim, range, and target exposure aligned perfectly. All of this had to occur within seconds, often while under direct enemy fire, with explosions rocking the tank and smoke obscuring vision. Van der Berg excelled at this extraordinarily demanding job, and his perfectly placed shots would destroy German tank after German tank over the coming months, validating Brennan's faith in his technical abilities and mental discipline. Technician 4th grade Anthony, Tony Ricci, 21 years old, from Brooklyn, New York, and universally called Tony, served as loader. Tony brought with him the toughness and street wisdom of urban life that served him exceptionally well in combat conditions. The loader's job was brutally physical and demanding. A 75mm round weighed approximately 25 pounds, and the 76mm rounds they would later receive weighed even more. During sustained combat engagements, the loader might handle dozens of rounds in rapid succession, selecting the correct ammunition type based on Brennan's shouted commands, loading smoothly despite the confined space and violent motion of the moving tank, then immediately preparing the next round for loading. Ricci was lean, but possessed wiry strength and exceptional endurance that never seemed to diminish regardless of how long combat continued. His speed and absolute reliability in loading gave Brennan's tank a rate of fire that consistently exceeded other Shermans in the battalion. These 4 men, led by Brennan, called themselves the Hellhounds, and they called their commander Iron Mike, a nickname that captured both genuine affection and profound respect for the man who led them repeatedly into situations where death seemed statistically inevitable. The nickname Iron Mike emerged during training when Brennan's absolute focus on combat preparation and his simultaneous paternal concern for his crew's welfare created a dynamic where he functioned as both their uncompromising leader and their protective guardian. Brennan was younger than Van der Berg and only slightly older than the others, but his force of personality and demonstrated leadership ability made him the unquestioned center of the crew's existence. They trusted him with absolute faith that bordered on religious conviction. That trust would be tested and validated dozens of times over the coming months of unrelenting combat. The crew had regularly outscored every other crew in the division during gunnery qualification exercises. Their teamwork was seamless, each man instinctively knowing his role and trusting his brothers to perform theirs perfectly. When Brennan called out a fire command, the crew responded with mechanical precision that appeared choreographed. Driver, halt. Gunner, sabote, tank front. On the way. The entire sequence from target identification to round impact could take less than 6 seconds with a well-trained crew. Brennan's crew could execute it in 4 seconds, and that 2-second advantage would save their lives repeatedly. Brennan's tactical philosophy was brutally simple, refined through years of training and intensive study of German armoured doctrine and American after-action reports from North Africa and Italy. Attack aggressively. Close the distance. Rapidly. Shoot first without hesitation. Never retreat unless absolutely tactically necessary. He believed fundamentally in closing with the enemy, in reaching ranges where the Sherman's advantages in mechanical reliability, rate of fire, and crew training could overcome German advantages in armor protection and gun penetration. German tanks like the Panther and Tiger possessed superior guns and vastly thicker armor capable of destroying a Sherman at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards, while the Sherman's 75mm gun could barely penetrate Panther frontal armor even at point-blank ranges. The tactical solution was straightforward: never fight at long range where German technical superiority became decisive. Brennan closed distances aggressively, maneuvering to achieve flank shots where even a Panther's armor could be penetrated, overwhelming German crews with rapid, accurate fire before they could effectively employ their superior firepower. June 27, 1944. Cherbourg Peninsula, France. The 4th Armoured Division's Combat Command received orders to support infantry elements, reducing German defensive positions, protecting approaches to Cherbourg, the critical deep-water port that Allied logistics planners desperately needed to sustain operations in France. This would be the division's initial combat operation and Brennan's first genuine test under fire. The mission was to attack fortified German positions held by elements of the 709th Infantry Division, battle-hardened troops who had been reinforced with anti-tank guns, artillery, and remnants of armoured units retreating from earlier Allied advances. The attack began at dawn with preparatory artillery bombardment that lasted 40 minutes, American guns pounding German positions with high-explosive shells that turned defensive lines into moonscapes of overlapping craters. Then came the order to advance. Brennan's Sherman moved forward with other tanks of Combat Command A, grinding through Norman countryside toward German defensive positions. Visibility was limited by terrain and morning fog that clung to low areas. Radio communications filled Brennan's headset with reports from other tank commanders. Contact reports, calls for artillery support, coordination instructions. The distinctive crack of German 75mm anti-tank guns echoed across fields, answered by the deeper boom of American tank guns returning fire. Black smoke from burning vehicles drifted across the battlefield, reducing visibility further. Brennan spotted German positions ahead through gaps in the terrain and smoke. Half-track, 11 o'clock, 400 yards. He gave the fire command, and Vanderberg sent a 75mm high-explosive round downrange with devastating accuracy. The round struck the German vehicle squarely, and it erupted in flames, secondary explosions from onboard ammunition tearing the half-track apart. Brennan's crew destroyed 5 German vehicles and killed over 60 enemy soldiers during that first day of combat operations. The violence and chaos of mechanized warfare proved exactly what months of training had prepared them for. Yet training could never fully replicate the psychological reality of men actively trying to kill you. Then came the moment that haunts every tank crew's nightmares. Iron Promise entered a village on the division's advance route, rolling down a narrow street between stone buildings that limited maneuver options severely. The village was supposedly cleared of enemy forces, according to the latest intelligence reports. But battlefield intelligence was frequently incomplete, and situations changed rapidly during fluid combat operations. As the Sherman advanced down the constricted street, a German soldier with a Panzerfaust stepped from a doorway less than 40 yards away, aimed the shoulder-fired anti-tank weapon directly at the tank's side armour, and fired before anyone in Brennan's crew could react. The Panzerfaust was devastatingly simple but terrifyingly effective, a shaped charge warhead mounted on a disposable launcher tube that could penetrate over 200 millimeters of armour, more than sufficient to destroy any Sherman, regardless of angle or range. The rocket motor ignited with a distinctive whoosh, and the warhead streaked across the short distance, impacting Iron Promise's side armour with a metallic crash that rang through the crew compartment like a massive bell. The shaped charge detonated against the armour, creating a jet of superheated metal that punched through the steel plating into the crew compartment. The tank shuddered violently from the impact. Smoke immediately filled the interior spaces, and fire alarms sounded throughout the vehicle. Brennan gave the immediate order without hesitation. "Bail out!" All 5 crew members scrambled from the catastrophically damaged tank, moving with the practiced speed that endless training had burned into muscle memory. Brennan exited first through the commander's hatch, followed immediately by Vanderberg. Morrison and Sullivan evacuated through the driver and assistant driver hatches in the front hull. Ricci squeezed through the loader's hatch on the turret's left side. They all escaped seconds before stored ammunition began cooking off from internal fires, sending flames and secondary explosions shooting skyward. The crew had survived their first tank loss with 0 casualties, though the experience left them psychologically shaken and deeply sobered about the lethal realities of armoured combat. Iron Promise, the first Sherman to bear that name under Brennan's command, was destroyed. The crew had lasted exactly 6 days in sustained combat operations. Brennan and his crew rejoined Combat Command A on foot, catching rides on other tanks until they could be assigned a replacement vehicle. The battle for the Cherbourg approaches continued through June 30th. Combat. Command A lost 28 tanks and 11 other vehicles during the three-day engagement, a brutal introduction to armoured warfare in Normandy's confined terrain and against Germany's experienced defensive tactics. German anti-tank fire was accurate and utterly devastating. The terrain favoured defenders at every turn, channeling American armour into killing zones where concealed guns could engage at optimal ranges. But the attacks succeeded in their operational objectives. American forces seized critical terrain features and established positions that would enable the subsequent breakout operations. The 4th Armoured Division had passed its initial combat test, learning invaluable lessons about hedgerow fighting that would serve them well in subsequent weeks. July 2nd, 1944. Replacement Depot, Normandy. Brennan and his crew received their replacement tank, an M4 Aoni with the significantly improved 76mm main gun, designated M4 Aoni 76W. Brennan was among the first tank commanders in his regiment to receive this upgraded variant, a recognition of his performance during the initial combat engagement, despite losing his tank. The new vehicle represented a quantum leap in anti-armour capability. The W designation stood for wet stowage, a critical safety improvement where ammunition racks were surrounded by jackets filled with water, ethylene glycol, and rust inhibitor. This wet stowage system dramatically reduced the catastrophic fire risk when the tank was penetrated by enemy rounds. Early model Shermans had earned the terrible nickname Ronson from German tankers, after the cigarette lighter that advertised lights first time, every time. The wet stowage system substantially improved crew survivability by preventing ammunition fires from spreading uncontrollably. The 76mm gun represented genuine revolutionary improvement in armour penetration capability compared to the original 75mm weapon. While the 75mm M3 gun struggled to penetrate Panther frontal armour at any practical combat range, the 76mm Mohn gun could penetrate Panther side armour at 2,000 yards and frontal armour at ranges approaching 600 yards when using armour-piercing ammunition. Against German Mark IV tanks, still the most commonly encountered German medium tank, the 76mm proved effective at even longer ranges. The compromise was reduced high explosive effectiveness against infantry and soft targets compared to the 75mm, but for Brennan's aggressive close-range armour-hunting tactics, the improved anti-tank capability proved invaluable beyond measure. Brennan immediately had Iron Promise painted on the replacement hull, maintaining the tradition and the psychological connection to their destroyed tank. The crew climbed aboard their new vehicle, familiarizing themselves with subtle differences in layout and controls compared to their previous Sherman. The 76mm gun was noticeably longer and heavier than the 75mm, slightly changing the tank's balance and handling characteristics. The internal arrangement of ammunition storage differed from their previous vehicle. The crew needed to learn these differences intimately to make the new tank truly their own, to develop the instinctive familiarity that meant the difference between life and death when decisions had to be made in fractions of seconds. Over the next 12 weeks, Brennan and his crew would write an unprecedented chapter in American armoured warfare history with this vehicle. The breakout from Normandy transformed the war from grinding attritional combat into a war of rapid movement and exploitation. Operation Cobra, launched July 25th, shattered German defensive lines with overwhelming air and artillery bombardment, creating gaps through which American armour poured into open country beyond the hedgerows. The 4th Armoured Division led the exploitation, racing south and east across France, covering more ground in days than they had in weeks of previous fighting. German units bypassed by the rapid advance attempted retreat but found their escape routes severed. Thousands surrendered. Those who chose to fight were overwhelmed by American firepower and mobility that gave them no opportunity to establish coherent defensive positions. Brennan's tank spearheaded attack after attack during the breakout and subsequent pursuit across France. The spearhead position was simultaneously the greatest honour and the most dangerous assignment in armoured warfare. The spearhead tank encountered enemy resistance first, was engaged first by anti-tank guns and panzerfausts, hit mines first, ran into prepared ambushes first. Casualty rates for spearhead tanks were astronomically high, with most spearhead tanks surviving only days before being destroyed. But Brennan volunteered for the role repeatedly, and his crew never questioned his judgment or his decisions. They trusted Iron Mike absolutely to lead them through hell itself if necessary. And somehow, against all statistical probability, Iron Promise kept rolling forward, kept destroying enemy vehicles with systematic efficiency, kept surviving when other tanks were hit and burned around them. At Rennes, France, Brennan distinguished himself while leading a reinforced platoon during the pursuit toward the Brittany ports. His column was advancing rapidly down a secondary road when they encountered a German column attempting to retreat eastward. A confused mass of trucks, half-tracks, armoured cars, and at least 2 Mark IV tanks trying to escape the Allied encirclement. Brennan immediately attacked without waiting for support or coordination with other American units. He closed to effective range and opened systematic fire, destroying vehicles with methodical precision. The German column disintegrated into chaos, some vehicles attempting escape, others returning ineffective fire, still others simply abandoning their vehicles and fleeing on foot. Brennan's crew destroyed 11 vehicles in that single engagement, including both Mark IV tanks that attempted to organize defensive resistance. While Brennan was consolidating his position after destroying the convoy, word came over the radio net that a German Panther had appeared on the main advance route ahead and was engaging the leading American elements. The Panther had established a hull-down position behind a slight rise in the terrain, using the ground for protection while engaging American Shermans with devastating effectiveness. 2 American tanks were already burning, their crews desperately bailing out through flames and smoke. Brennan had to choose instantly: remain in his current position mopping up the destroyed convoy, or race forward to engage the far more dangerous Panther threat. He chose aggression, as he always did. Brennan ordered Morrison to get back to the main column at maximum possible speed. The Sherman raced down the road at 28 miles per hour, faster than was remotely safe given terrain and visibility limitations, but Brennan understood that every second of delay meant additional American casualties and increased risk that the Panther would withdraw to a new position before he could engage it. As they approached the reported Panther position, Brennan scanned desperately for the German tank while Ricci loaded armor-piercing ammunition and van der Berg prepared to engage the instant a target appeared. Brennan spotted the Panther still engaging American forces to its front from its hull-down position, its attention completely focused on targets ahead and unaware of Brennan's approach from the flank. The German commander had committed the fatal tactical error of fixating on immediate threats while losing situational awareness of his flanks and rear. Brennan immediately recognized the golden opportunity. The Panther's side armor, while still formidable, was vulnerable to the 76mm gun at this range. Brennan gave the fire command with absolute calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Gunner, sabot, Panther, left flank, center mass. Van der Berg traversed the turret smoothly, placing his crosshairs precisely on the Panther's side armor just below the turret ring, where armor was thinnest and internal components most vulnerable. On the way, the 76mm gun fired, the armor-piercing round covering the distance in a fraction of a second. The projectile struck the Panther's side armor and penetrated cleanly, detonating inside the crew compartment with catastrophic results. The German tank shuddered from the internal explosion. Smoke poured from every hatch and vision port. Moments later, flames appeared, and secondary ammunition explosions began tearing the vehicle apart from inside. Only one German crewman managed to escape before the catastrophic ammunition detonation that blew the turret completely off the hull, sending it tumbling through the air to crash 15 yards away. Brennan had destroyed his first Panther through superior tactical positioning rather than superior firepower, maneuvering to achieve a flank shot where his weapon was effective, executing with his crew with such speed and precision that the German crew never had opportunity to react or defend themselves. The American column resumed its advance with Brennan's tank now occupying the spearhead position, having earned that dangerous honor through demonstrated tactical excellence and absolute courage under fire. From August through early September, Brennan's combat record grew to legendary proportions throughout the 4th Armored Division and beyond. His crew destroyed vehicles with such systematic efficiency that division intelligence officers struggled to verify and document all the claims. German tanks, assault guns, half-tracks, armored cars, trucks, anti-tank guns, artillery pieces, all fell to Brennan's aggressive tactics and his crew's exceptional gunnery. By early September, Brennan had personally accounted for the destruction of over 280 enemy vehicles, including 15 confirmed tank kills that represented the highest verified total for any American tank commander in the European theatre. September 13th through 15th, 1944. Nancy, France. Brennan commanded the lead tank in an attack that would earn him the Distinguished Service Cross, America's second highest military decoration for extraordinary heroism in combat. The citation, approved by division headquarters and signed by senior commanders, described Brennan's actions in detail that still reads like fiction decades later. Brennan was advancing far ahead of his supporting task force, having outdistanced other tanks in his characteristically aggressive push toward enemy positions. Over 3 days of nearly continuous combat, advancing often completely alone or with only 1 or 2 other tanks in support, Brennan's crew engaged and destroyed 6 German tanks in separate encounters spanning those 72 hours. The first 2 were Mark IVs destroyed in a running engagement through a village where German tanks were attempting to establish defensive positions. The third was a Panther destroyed from ambush as it attempted to cross an intersection. The 4th and 5th were assault guns destroyed during a brief but intense firefight in an industrial area. The 6th was another Panther destroyed in a duel where both tanks fired simultaneously, but van der Berg's aim proved superior and his round penetrated while the German round missed by inches. In addition to the tanks, Brennan's crew destroyed 4 anti-tank gun positions that had been carefully sighted to ambush American armor, approximately 65 unarmored vehicles including half-tracks, trucks, and command cars, and inflicted catastrophic casualties on enemy personnel that intelligence officers estimated exceeded several hundred killed or wounded. The citation noted that Brennan's extraordinary heroism, unwavering courage, and inspired leadership under devastating enemy fire permitted the rapid advance of his task force with minimal casualties to friendly forces. His exceptional personal bravery and absolute devotion to duty exemplified the highest traditions of military service and reflected great credit upon himself and the United States Army. The official citation, despite its formal military language, significantly understated the mortal danger of what Brennan accomplished. Advancing alone or with minimal support, Brennan deliberately positioned himself in maximum danger to draw enemy fire and identify enemy positions for following American forces. Every anti-tank gun he destroyed had fired at least 1 shot at Iron Promise before he killed it. Every German tank he engaged possessed theoretical capability to destroy his Sherman before he could destroy it. Brennan survived through exceptional tactical judgment, superior crew training, aggressive execution, and extraordinary fortune that defied statistical probability. The Distinguished Service Cross recognized these actions officially, though many officers who witnessed Brennan's heroism believed he deserved the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. September 15th, 1944, Aricourt, France. The final battle began in morning fog that reduced visibility to less than 100 yards. The 4th Armored Division was engaged in desperate fighting against German counterattacks, attempting to halt the American advance toward the German border. The 5th Panzer Army had been ordered to stop the American penetration at any cost, and German commanders committed their precious armor reserves in desperate attacks against American positions around Aricourt. Brennan's orders that morning were explicit and reflected division headquarters' growing concern for his survival. Stay in supporting position. Do not spearhead. The High Command wanted Brennan to survive this engagement so he could be withdrawn for desperately needed rest and possible reassignment to training duties where his tactical knowledge could be shared with replacement crews arriving from the United States. But Brennan understood what division commanders apparently did not. In tank combat, There were no truly safe positions, only varying degrees of exposure to lethal danger. He moved forward with Combat Command A as German armor launched coordinated attacks against American defensive positions. The fighting was chaotic and brutal, with visibility so poor that tanks from both sides found themselves intermixed, fighting at point-blank ranges, where tactical sophistication mattered less than raw firepower and crew reaction time. Willis Ole, Dutch van der Berg, had been temporarily rotated back to the United States 3 days earlier as part of standard crew rotation policies designed to give combat veterans brief respite and to use their experience for training replacement crews. In van der Berg's place, manning the main gun for this final battle, was Private First Class Leonard Harris, a 19-year-old gunner from Ohio with solid training, but lacking van der Berg's months of combat experience with Brennan's crew. The synchronization that Brennan's original crew had developed through dozens of engagements was diminished, though Harris was competent and doing his absolute best to match the crew's exceptional standards. The battle developed rapidly as German Panthers and Mark IVs attacked through the fog, attempting to overwhelm American positions through shock and superior numbers. Brennan's tank engaged multiple targets, destroying 2 Mark IVs in quick succession as they emerged from the fog at close range. Then disaster struck with the horrifying suddenness that characterized armored combat at its most brutal. A German Panther, concealed in a carefully prepared position that provided excellent fields of fire while protecting the tank's vulnerable flanks, engaged Iron Promise with devastating accuracy. The Panther's commander had positioned perfectly, waiting for American tanks to advance into his predetermined kill zone. He fired 3 rounds in rapid succession, all aimed with precision at Brennan's Sherman. The first armor-piercing round struck the turret's frontal armor and penetrated, exploding inside the crew compartment with catastrophic effect. The second round hit almost simultaneously, striking the hull and causing massive internal damage. The third round, fired as insurance, struck the engine compartment and set the power plant ablaze. Private First Class Leonard Harris was killed instantly by the first penetrating round, never knowing what hit him, dying in the gunner's seat, where Dutch van der Berg would have been sitting if routine rotation policies had not sent van der Berg home 3 days earlier. Brennan, standing in the commander's position as always, was struck by shrapnel and blast effects from the penetrating rounds. Metal fragments tore into his left arm and chest, causing massive trauma and immediate shock. The concussion from the internal explosions momentarily stunned him, but some deep survival instinct developed through months of combat drove him to give the order through pain and disorientation. "Bail out now." The surviving crew members evacuated the catastrophically damaged tank with desperate speed. Morrison and Sullivan exited through their hull hatches, Morrison finally confronting his worst nightmare of escaping a burning tank, but doing so successfully despite his terror. Ritchie squeezed through the loader's hatch despite injuries from the explosions. Brennan attempted to climb out through the commander's hatch, but his shattered left arm would not support his weight, and his chest wounds were bleeding profusely. He struggled against pain, shock, and the knowledge that the tank might explode catastrophically at any second. Morrison and Ritchie, already clear of the vehicle, turned back despite mortal danger to assist their commander. They pulled Brennan free from the hatch and dragged him away from Iron Promise as ammunition began cooking off inside, sending flames and explosions shooting skyward. Medics arrived within minutes, stabilizing Brennan and preparing him for immediate evacuation to field hospitals in the rear areas. His crew watched as their commander was loaded onto a medical jeep and driven away towards surgical facilities. They had survived 3 tank losses together, had fought through 90 continuous days of combat, had destroyed 280 enemy vehicles, and killed well over 1,000 German soldiers. But Leonard Harris was dead, and Iron Mike's war had ended in blood and shrapnel on a foggy morning in eastern France. Brennan was evacuated through the military medical system, moving from field hospitals to base hospitals, and eventually to military hospitals in England, and finally the United States. His wounds were severe, but not ultimately life-threatening. Surgeons repaired the damage to his chest and arm through multiple operations over subsequent months. He retained full function of his arm, though he would carry shrapnel fragments and surgical scars for the remainder of his life. He was alive, and his combat career had ended not with death but with survival and eventual recovery. The final statistics of Brennan's combat service remain unmatched in American military history. In 90 days of continuous combat operations, from June 20th through September 15th, 1944, Brennan and his crew destroyed 280 enemy armored vehicles, including 15 confirmed tank kills against German medium and heavy tanks. They killed or wounded over 1,000 German soldiers. They led 23 major attacks, always spearheading, always in maximum danger. Brennan survived 3 complete tank losses, first to a Panzerfaust, second to a mine that the historical record barely documents, finally to a German Panther's accurate gunnery. His crew survived with him through the first 2 losses, but Leonard Harris paid the ultimate price in that final engagement, dying in Dutch van der Berg's position through pure chance of rotation timing. Brennan was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions, from September 13th through 15th. He received the Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters for repeated acts of extraordinary heroism. The Bronze Star with V device recognized additional valor in combat. The Purple Heart with oak leaf cluster acknowledged his wounds. France would later award him the Croix de Guerre with palm, and Belgium the Order of Leopold II. He was nominated for the Medal of Honor twice, but both nominations were rejected by awards boards that maintained the position that tanks were crew-served weapons. Therefore, individual heroism in armored combat did not merit the nation's highest decoration, a decision that reflected institutional prejudice rather than objective evaluation of his documented actions under fire. After recovering from his wounds, Brennan faced the same choice many combat veterans confronted: accept discharge and return to civilian life, or remain in military service. Brennan chose to stay. He re-enlisted in April 1946, continuing his army career in various training and advisory positions where his combat experience could benefit subsequent generations of armor officers and crews. He served with distinction through the Cold War, eventually retiring as a major in June 1963 after 22 years of total service. He settled in Junction City, Kansas, near Fort Riley, remaining connected to the armor community and occasionally speaking to military audiences about his combat experiences and the tactical lessons he had learned at such terrible cost. Brennan raised 6 children with Sarah, 3 sons and 3 daughters. The marriage that began during emergency leave in December 1942 endured through war, wounds, and the challenges of military life, lasting until Brennan's death in 1994, a testament to bonds forged in the brief peaceful moments before Brennan departed for England and the battlefields that would define his generation. Michael Patrick Brennan died on November 3, 1994, in Junction City, Kansas. He was 73 years old, having lived 50 years after his wounding at Aracourt. He was buried with full military honors at Fort Riley National Cemetery, recognized as one of America's most accomplished tank commanders, a leader whose tactical innovations and personal courage under fire influenced American armored doctrine for generations. His legacy lived on in the thousands of soldiers he trained during his post-war service, in the tactical principles he validated through combat, and in the example he set for aggressive, intelligent leadership under the most demanding conditions imaginable. In 2001, Fort Knox dedicated a tank gunnery training facility in his honor, ensuring that every armor officer trained there would learn about Iron Mike and his crew, about their tactics, their courage, and their sacrifice. Brennan's story illustrates the larger American narrative of World War II. Ordinary citizens transformed by necessity into extraordinary warriors, technical disadvantages overcome through superior training and aggressive tactics, democratic values proving their worth in the ultimate test of combat. He was a farm boy from Kentucky who became the most effective tank commander in American history through skill, courage, and determination. His story, preserved in military records and unit histories, continues to inspire and instruct, reminding us that in warfare, as in life, success comes not from superior equipment, but from superior people properly led and trained. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.